Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 213, and I had a conversation with Tony Green. He teaches at the Bishop O'Dowd School here in California. He teaches social studies, African American studies. He is a moderator for the Black Student Union, and he is now officially a film producer, documentary films. So that's exciting. I learned of Tony when I was surfing the internets, looking at Instagram, and came across a post that he was in, and he was talking about the long, hot summers. And that caught my attention. And so I reached out to him and asked if he'd be on the show, and he very kindly said yes, and we got him on right away. And I'm really excited about that. I learned so much in this episode. I'm really excited to do a bunch of deep diving into the internets and books and things because of some of the stuff we talked about I didn't know about, and I love that, which is, happens a lot that I don't know about stuff. So I'm excited to learn more after talking with Tony. Usual stuff, social media, Hey Human Podcast can be found on Instagram and Facebook. You can find my personal social media under Susan Ruthism, and that's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you want to know about other things I do, my paintings and music and writings and such, that can be found at susanruth.com. Of course, heyhumanpodcast.com is where you're going to find information about all the shows, and especially the links page. And this episode, there's a lot of reference material. Please go to the links page and check that out. There's going to be a bevy of stuff for you to read and learn about, and maybe learn more about. There were some things that Tony and I spoke of that, I just had a tiny scratch the surface knowledge of, and it was neat to hear him go deeper into it. Man, I would have loved to have had him in my high school history class. Oh, that would have been so cool. Really, I could tell he's a great teacher. You can see the passion of teachers who love teaching. And he's been doing it for over 30 years, and he still has that fire in his eyes and loves what he does and loves educating minds. So it was exciting for me to be able to talk with him. Rate and review Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can email me, susan@heyhumanpodcast.com. I welcome that. And thanks for listening. Thanks for spreading the word. I really appreciate it. Here we go. All right, Tony Green, welcome to Hey Human.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. You're in California, correct?
Yes, Berkeley, Oakland border, California.
Okay, I'm in Los Angeles, so.
Okay, yeah. We're neighbors then.
Yeah, that's right. And you teach at, is it a high school, the Bishop, is it a private school or?
Yes, a Catholic school, Bishop O'Dowd High School, about 1,250 students.
Wow, I think that's how many people were in my graduating class.
Oh, so are you from Los Angeles originally?
No, I grew up in Seattle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we had a huge high school. So, how long have you been teaching there?
I've been teaching there for 33 years, and I've been teaching 40 years overall.
You don't look old enough to have been teaching that long.
well, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, tell me where you're from originally. Are you from California or?
No, I'm actually a naturalized American citizen from Portugal.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, I was born on Teixeira Island.
And when
the third island in the Portuguese chain, Azores Island.
And how old were you when you came to America?
About 3 years old.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were your parents military or is?
My dad was Air Force. So he was Air Force in Vietnam, and he was Army Air Corps in Korea. Right. So, he had an interesting case because he was one of the first units to actually integrate the nation's military. He was like an experimental unit. And what they would do, it was called force cohesion. So So his military base was in the deep South in Valdosta, Georgia, right on the Georgia-Florida border in 1950. And they had a mixed unit. So his athletic teams would be, mixed with all races when it was illegal because of Jim Crow segregation. And their cheerleaders would be all young, blonde-haired white women. And so what they were trying to do was they were trying to test to see if that experiment would work out in battle. And at the time in Korea, we were, the United Nations forces were almost driven off the Korean peninsula. It was called the Battle of the Pusan Perimeter. And so what the United States realized is that they had to do something quick, and integration would be the answer, because it would bring in more troops. So he was part of that group. Right. Mm-hmm.
It's rather like when Abraham Lincoln realized that he needed more troops.
Yes, the same situation. Mm-hmm. And so then we were called. And like always, we responded. Yes.
Did your dad speak about how it was in those early stages? How was the reception from the white soldiers and even his, people that were black? And
well, not really. No, not really. But my stepdad did. So my stepdad of 30 years, who was different, and that's the one that was featured in the article by Gene Yang. He did, and things were completely and totally segregated for him. So he was 1st Marine Division during the Iwo Jima campaign, and he was like I said in the article, he was a stretcher bearer. So he collected bodies and body parts in 110-degree weather. And they hopped from island to island, and other interesting thing about him is his father was lynched his father was lynched about a year and a half before, he was drafted into the military and actually thrown in the Mississippi River, and, body never, there was no real push by law enforcement to find the culprits. But it was a very small town, Scotlandville, so it would have been easy to find the culprits.
Mm-hmm. I imagine that to go and serve a country that doesn't even see you as a full human being, I don't even know how to wrap my head around that.
Yeah. And both of them, neither one of them could vote when they got back to the States. They couldn't vote. And they couldn't receive the same accommodations after, serving, honorably, because between both of them, they had 75 years of military service, and 5 wars. Mm-hmm. But they still couldn't vote.
It's unreal. The flag behind you, is that for one of them?
Yeah, so if you look at that flag, the flag is my dad's service flag. He was buried with honors. Okay, the bullet, that shell above the flag, that's Papa's shell, because they both received, military honors. Yeah, so that belongs to them.
And they get the 21 gun salute.
Yes, actually not 21 guns anymore, because
it's
of
7
military.
and 3, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Right. Is the history in your family being really so entrenched in American history and in wars and all that? Is that what brought on your passion for becoming a history teacher?
Yeah, actually a few things. From my my mother's side of the family in Ocala, Florida, they're all educators. They're all educators, and so that's one of the things that my mom pushed. She was a student nurse. She went to Florida A&M University, with traditionally black college, in Florida. And, my aunties went to Bethune-Cookman, traditionally black colleges, and they were all in the teaching profession. So my mom started out as a nurse for Kaiser, which has got a whole interesting background because they were established to, essentially save the shipping industry in Richmond, California, Kaiser shipyards, because the industries operated 24/7. So what they had to do, if you were injured, they would give you quick managed care, and put you back on the line so you could create some of these ships. Some of them were actually, fully functional within 72 hours. And it's one of the reasons why the Bay Area became so integrated is because of the need for the military, between the shipyards and the munitions industry and the 12 military bases.
So what year, may I ask what year you were born?
Yeah, I was born in 1958.
1958.
Yes.
So you came of age at a very tumultuous time.
Very, very tumultuous time. In fact, my first school, it was Flossin Elementary School, and it was in the housing project in Vallejo, Floyd Terrace housing project. It partially burned down in the long, hot summers. Yeah, it partially burned down in the long, hot summers. So that, that was it was a stressful time, but it was, it was what we went through. We were pretty much, I would say, not really isolated in our part of town because we welcomed it, but if we ever, left that perimeter, we had a perimeter around us. It was Highway 29, Broadway, and Sereno Drive. If we ever left those confines, the treatment outside was pretty different. But I grew up in Vallejo, California, which was very much a military town at the time, surrounding Mare Island Naval Base.
Did you get the sense that because you were a military family that you had a protection even if you stepped outside those boundary lines, or did it all bets were off?
Not at all. Yeah, not at all. We protected ourselves when we stepped outside the bounds because it wasn't the only black neighborhood. There were 5 black neighborhoods in Vallejo. And our neighborhood was one of the, our neighborhood is a historical landmark. It's called the Lofus Track. And the reason being is because, Mr. Williams, Mr. B.W. Williams had a construction company. It was an all-black construction company. So it was the first construction company west of the Mississippi that was all black that built a complete housing tract. So we actually have a memorial up in our neighborhood today. Yeah, it was called the Lofus Housing Tract. Right.
You spoke of the long, hot summer, and I think here's the thing that I've noticed just on social media and talking with people. I moved here. I moved to LA. I lived in Tennessee for 13 years. And I grew up in Seattle. These are very different worlds. And the thing that strikes me is that there is little knowledge about Black history in America, and yet it's a rich history. And the last couple of weeks, we're talking about, looting, and they want to put this base on it. I was like, do y'all even know any of the history of the long hot summer? Do you know about what happened with Rodney King? Do you know what happened in Watts? Do you know what happened? And people just don't know. Do you know about the bombing in Oklahoma, the Black Wall Street? Do you know about? There's just so many things that people are ignorant to, and I think they for some reason in some people's minds, it's not across the board, of course, but in some people's minds, there's this idea that all of a sudden there's this upstartedness. No, God, read some history books, please.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous thing too. It's a very dangerous thing. What I explain to my students, because I teach world history, sometimes U.S. history, economics and foreign policy, African American studies. Guyana class, my newest class is called The Rise of Black Nationalism: The Caribbean, Coffee, Cane, and Culture. So what I always do is I start off with talking about, the common nature of humanity. Okay, we all have one direct descendant from Eastern Africa. Geneticists call her Mitochondrial Eve. Okay, and she gave birth to all of us. And what we do is, as we migrate out of Africa, we stay in Africa for about 210 out of 250,000 years that we've been humans. We don't become non-Africans till about 40,000 years ago. And so that's when we start adapting to the environment that we face, right? And then we start creating these variations that we know now is this status called race.
Right,
which is
race is a lie.
Totally fictitious.
Yeah,
yeah, it's a complete lie.
Yeah.
But if you look at the country, if you look at the English colonies, the only reason why the English colonies survive is because of two crops. One is tobacco. Okay, one is rice. Okay, both of those are crops that were grown completely at this time in the plantation system by African people. Okay, rice was actually smuggled in the hair of African people who had come here. And what they did is in Charleston, South Carolina, actually in the Sea Islands of Charleston, South Carolina, they planted that crop, and the overseers saw its value. So then you have this huge industry develop. But the English colonies were a failed experiment until African people came along. And if you look at history that way, okay, you can see the importance of who we were. We built all of the plantations in the South. Most of them were built directly by a group called the Mindi, who were expert builders. Using no nails, they would fit these plantations together, houses like puzzles. I visited quite a few, my wife and I, and you'll see like in New Orleans, there's a plantation called Laura. It's a 25,000 square foot plantation. Okay, how long do you think it took to build? 25,000 square feet.
A long time, especially
a long time. That's what most people think. But it actually took about 14 days. So it took 7 Mindi using 2 canoes, 14 days to build a 25,000 square foot plantation. And they did not use any nails. They fit it together like a puzzle. They also calculated flood stage from the Mississippi, the Gulf of Mexico, and Lake Pontchartrain to be 25 feet. So they built it 25 feet up from the foundation. So when they flooded, and they flooded every year, just like you saw on Katrina, Plantation House never flooded. So these people were brilliant.
They were engineers along with being architects and
yes.
others. Yeah.
Yes. And so that's who we were. And if you teach history like that, and you don't teach the idea of racist status, you start to look at the humans who contributed to the greatness of the United States differently.
It is interesting to me if you go back through, I think of the pyramids, for example, and there's the rhetoric that, aliens had to have done it because look at the pyramids. And I think, wow, that really gives a disservice to a whole lot of people that had incredible ingenuity.
Oh, yes. Yes.
It's interesting that we want to take that away from people.
Right. But, in order to create a slave class, what you first have to do is dehumanize them. So you figure these pyramids were built about 6,000 years ago. And the Khufu's pyramid was seamless, about 486 feet in height. So it wasn't stacked blocks like it looks like now. It was seamless, built with Tour limestone. It was this white, it looked like white, smooth marble. And you figure there were 2.5 million stones, the average of 7,000 pounds a piece, cut to the exactness that it fit together seamlessly without the use of any adherent like cement. And you had one, brilliant engineer, Imhotep, who not only designed the pyramid, but also created medicine in the first medical textbooks. One person. Okay, so that shows the ingenuity, of people from Africa. And, of course, there's about 1,400 different ethnic groups in Africa. So, Africa is a pretty broad, concept. But, the fact that you would define anyone from that continent, as one person, being black and assigning them, inferior status is mind-boggling.
Yeah, but boy, humans love to do it. I mean, we love to generalize and to lump a singular individual in as the spokesperson for all. It's that superiority bullshit, if you don't mind me saying.
Oh, no, I don't mind you saying it. White supremacy, that's what it is. White supremacy has no validity, but, it was created to give status, and I'm Portuguese. Between us and the Spanish in the 15th century, we were the ones who created this. We used to call it the purity of blood laws. And so what it would do is it would give, sanction for leadership to anyone with light skin. Anyone with dark skin would be subservient. Yeah, but we created it. So when we launched the Age of Discovery between the Spanish and the Portuguese, we would take that attitude anywhere we traveled. And what I tell my kids is us as Portuguese, Portuguese were the original merchant seamen. And what we would do is as we traveled, we spread our semen all over the world. So you will see Portuguese.
I bet the kids love that one.
You'll see Portuguese of every single nationality. Okay, but what you also see is you see colorism on this scale, this manichaeistic scale, lightness superior to the darkness. And the Spanish used to call it Las Pinturas de Castas. So they created the original pictures called the Pictures of the Caste. There was about 100, and it would depict the original races. And now we've cut it down to 5, but originally Las Pinturas de Castas would depict any kind of what they perceived as a racial mixture. So if you had a African person mixed with a native person, you had one race. If that native person mixed with an African person, you had another race. If that African and native person mixed with another native, you would have another race. Okay, but that shows you the really lack of scientific support for the idea of race. It's totally made up, 100%. Besides
the idea of Caucasian is make-believe as well. The idea that signifies whiteness is a lie.
Right. Which is ridiculous, because if you look at, the people of the Caucasus Mountains, they're not white, they're brown. Yeah, so it's just, the thing is just totally made up. And we've given it so much sanction that you have, black men and black women murdered in the street in the 21st century. Based on this false ideology based on status and nothing else but status. And this white supremacy thing is real, and it gave control over the peoples that Western European countries would conquer during that period of colonialism and exploitation.
Yeah, you tell a lie enough times and you can turn it into a truth.
Exactly. And if you infuse it into the educational system where everybody believes it, it becomes true.
Yeah, I think back to my high school days and my history classes, and now as an adult, realizing how absolutely full of crap my history classes were. They on such an insane level. And it's so biased. The history of the Americas based around this villainous, but of course deified Columbus, deified when I was a kid. Now, of course, when we actually look at the truth of it, not a great guy.
Yeah. Not at all. Not at all.
And they miss Port Royal. They miss, there's like all these other places of importance that are just completely erased.
Right. And that's what puts us in this situation that we're in today, is this misunderstanding of who we are as Americans and the contributions that, America became, this dominant civilization, because what we did is we took the best and the brightest of all walks of life around the world. And unfortunately, what we did is exploit them. We exploited them and treated whatever they had of value that they would bring to the table, we treated them as commodities, and even humans and human life. That's a very dangerous thing.
Absolutely.
It's a very dangerous thing.
I'd like to say to anyone, I challenge you to go a day, 24-hour period, without using anything, reading anything, listening to anything any one day that was not made by a person of color. Good luck. Because we're surrounded by, I mean, everything, our computers, our LASIK surgery, the glass in your homes, the guitar, music, God knows music, the greatest minds of literature, the light that you stop at a stoplight for. It's so frustrating.
Blood transfusions, yes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, tons of Henrietta Lacks. You wouldn't have half of the medical discoveries without her.
Right. It's 100% true. I had a pretty serious, medical issue in January. I was in Texas actually delivering a presentation to a group called the National Black Student Athlete Summit at the University of Texas. And 15 minutes before my presentation, I had passed out. And I wasn't able to do my presentation till the next day. But it turns out that, my heart had stopped for 10 seconds.
Oh, my.
And they didn't find out until I went back to Oakland. So I had to go through all these different, heart procedures. And I had transfusions. And everybody who was in, because I was in ICU for about 17 days. And the thing that I noticed is that everybody in there, and their families were so worried about whether they were going to live or not. Race was not even a concern. My neighbor, actually his name was Fred, in ICU. When my wife and I first walked in, he was watching, Fox, and had it blaring loud and everything. And I'm like, oh, here we go. But we ended up being the best friends in the hospital because we were in there for like 7 days. And we saw the common interest because we were that close to, whatever happening. And, when things become that acute, you start to look at life differently. And when they were transfusing my blood, I could have cared less where it came from, But that shows who we are as humans. We're not racist. We haven't been here long enough. There haven't been enough variations. So that status has done a lot of damage. That status of race has done a lot of damage.
I wish that we would start from a place of sameness instead of a place of otherness. But of course, that touches on how humans feel about themselves. I firmly believe that we treat other people based on how we feel about ourselves. If there's a false ego, the ego is a liar, telling you that you are somehow better than. That's within you. That starts with you and ends with you. Period.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know a lot about the long hot summer. That was how I learned of you in the first place. Was because as I was doing some research, I came upon the cartoon of you talking about it. Will you go into that a bit and your experience?
Into the cartoon of the long hot summer.
The long hot summer.
Okay. Well, the long hot summers, this is the interesting thing. And I think I told you that, me and another friend, a friend had called me up. His name is Kurt Robinson. And, the interesting thing about Kirk, and I'm going to get to the long hot summer and how we're going to address it, is that, the second time my heart stopped in the hospital, I had a class, the rise of Black nationalism. And I was really afraid that I was not going to be able to come back and teach that class. And in that class, since it's the class covers from Malcolm X's birth through the Black nationalist movement, we cover the long hot summers. So I called up my friend Kurt Robinson, who was actually the first Black sports attorney in the nation's history. And he was one of my mentors in college, and he took over the class for me. But he calls me up this past, or last Monday, as a matter of fact, and he says, Tony, let's put together a movie about this rebellion that's taking place. And he wanted me to do set the historical foundation for it. And so I called one of my former students, Ayanna Ziegler, this great young black female filmmaker to put together this movie. And so what I did is I started to establish a historical foundation for this movie. I did not start with the Long Hot Summers. That's going to be in the second part. But the Long Hot Summers would not have taken place without African-American GIs who participated in World War I. And they were nicknamed the New Negroes once they came back. Because once they went over to Europe, what they experienced in Europe is that there was no discrimination against black people in Europe. So they were treated equally.
That's why Baldwin went to France, right? James Baldwin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
he's one of my literary heroes. I love James Baldwin.
You said what now?
He's one of my literary heroes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the reason being is because of that, that experience they had in France. And they saw the black, African soldiers fighting. And they started to gain this sense of esteem, and they got into, the literary movement, like you said, and came back as new Negroes because they weren't thinking like slaves anymore. Alain Locke coined that phrase, the new Negroes, and he was one of the foundations of the Harlem Renaissance. And they would start the civil rights movement, and they would start the Harlem Renaissance based on that. But they were also now assertive, so there would never be another pogrom in the black community. There would be violence, but it would be two-sided violence because now they were fighting back because they had been trained and they had esteem. So they were the foundation for the Long Hot Summers was established there in 1919 called the Red Summers. All right. And so that's where we're going to start that movie from, is the Red Summers. The second part is going to be the Long Hot Summers. And the foundation for the Long Hot Summers was exactly the same as the foundation, from the Red Summers, which was the military returning back from conflict and feeling a greater sense of esteem. Because I told you about my dad's experience in Korea. Korea was the nation's first attempt to integrate the military. Vietnam was the nation's first attempt to create an integrated armed forces. And there was the first integrated armed forces completely was during the Vietnam War. Those soldiers between those conflicts came back with a much different attitude and higher expectations. So when they were mistreated by police violence during the 1960s, they would respond.
When freedom and self-esteem becomes its own rebellious act, there's definitely something broken with the system. If freedom is a rebellious act,
yes,
self-esteem and self-worth, if those are considered somehow rebellious, then whoa,
right,
let's get deep into that, because that's insanity. Exactly.
Especially in a country whose whole foundation was based on a rebellious act, and whose whole foundation supposedly is supposed to be based on the idea that all humans are given by God inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So how could the looting now be considered as a rebellious act when that's the basis of a country? Boston Tea Party.
Because the color of the skin is different. That's why. Now,
exactly.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
It's the same reason why protesting, with an armed militia at the footsteps of a Capitol building was okay, but suddenly anyone walking through the streets saying
with heavy weapons.
Yeah, right. Like that was okay, but walking through the streets and demanding equality and not have the shit beat out of you just because you're black.
Right.
But what a concept.
Exactly.
But boy, that was apples and oranges to so many people, which again, people are coming from where they feel about themselves. And I think that there is a great fear amongst that particular kind of white person that thinks, oh shit, that, we've been high on the hog for quite a while, and who are these upstarts?
Right. And when all everybody is doing is looking for the same rights, the same rights that are guaranteed by the law of the land.
Right. And what a concept. You don't get to say the Constitution is only okay here, but not okay here. It doesn't work that way. Either you're a constitutionalist or you're not.
Exactly. And so, back to the long, hot summer. So if you look at that civil unrest, the civil unrest occurs in all of the cities that we as Black people moved to between the first migration to the East Coast to support the country for World War I and the second migration that we moved to the West Coast to support the country during World War II. So those were the people who reacted, those sons of those first migrants who moved to support the war, and they were assertive. They left the South with certain expectations, to leave the viciousness of the South. My mom was visited by the Klan in Central Florida on a regular basis, but they left to leave that viciousness, and they came here to experience the same thing. But at that point, during the 1960s, they had been influenced by the participation in those wars, and they were assertive, and they had high expectations, and their kids had high expectations. During the Detroit World Series, you could actually see the city of Detroit burning in the background during the game. And my man, Kurt Robinson, is from Detroit. So he remembers those riots, very personally. Very personally. Yeah, but those long, hot summers would happen every single summer. You could expect them to happen, and the same thing, everybody knew it was going to happen. These things were going to be out of control.
The Black nationalists, how did they become a big part of this movement? In my understanding of Malcolm X, even he had an arc of his belief system and how he started and what at the height of Nation of Islam, how he felt about it, and then actually starting to he still maintained being a Muslim, but he started stepping away from the what's his name?
Elijah Muhammad. So if you look at Malcolm X's parents were Garveyites. They were followers of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. And Marcus Mosiah Garvey created the largest Black mass movement in the history of the world. It was called the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And what Marcus Garvey did is he created a whole separate infrastructure for Black people to succeed in the Western world. And he had Black hospitals. He had Black airlines. He had a Black steamship company. All right. He created Black stores because he felt that African-American people in the United States and in the Caribbean were not going to get a fair shake. And the interesting thing about him is he's from a group called the Maroons. Okay, and the Maroons were African people in the Caribbean who never fell victim to slavery as an institution because they would always fight back. Yeah, they were called Maroons. And so he was a Maroon. So culturally, he was given, I would say that psychological strength. And since he did the same thing in developing that Universal Negro Improvement Association, and Malcolm X's parents were Garveyites, that's how he grew up to think of African-American people as equal to anyone on the planet. All right. Early part of his life, they were solid. His father was lynched too. His mother was thrown into an insane asylum. Okay, that's when he started to struggle, and then he got involved, in a lot of illicit activities that trap a lot from our community. Are trapped in those same illicit activities until they come to that realization. Malcolm gets his realization once he's thrown into prison And essentially, he's thrown into prison because he's acting out of his prescribed role in society. He was having relationships with white women, you know, and that was a threat. And it always has been a threat in the United States, you know, because the eugenics movement and fascism, you know, regards to race starts here and goes to Europe. It doesn't start in Europe and comes here.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought that was a Hitler. Well, I mean, I assume long before Hitler, there was the idea of keeping races pure, but I thought that Hitler was like the poster child.
Yes, Hitler is the poster child, right? But Hitler gets the idea from here, the eugenics movement from here in the United States. We had the Nazis sold out in the 1930s. They sold out Madison Square Garden.
I did know that. Yes, I remember seeing pictures of that. That's right.
Right. Huge movement. Klan almost had a president here in the United States. So teach that in history. If you really want to know why Black people are so angry when they see time after time after time Black men and women killed, not just by police. There was an incident, I believe, in Georgia by just some neighborhood folks. The young man was just jogging through the neighborhood and he was murdered. Right. So Malcolm sees this. And so it influences him when he goes into prison and he meets this real OG, prisoner by the name of Bembry. And Bembry starts to talk about him and educate him in African history. And at that point, Malcolm starts to come to this realization that something ain't right.
And that guy talked about Black superiority, right? Wasn't that his thing? If I remember, I haven't read Autobiography of Malcolm X in a while, but I remember him, part of the thing was, you've been lied to, there's no such thing as white superiority, and in fact, the Blacks are more superior. There was like a shift in an understanding for Malcolm X. Yes,
because Bembry was saying historically, we were talking about the Egyptians. Mm-hmm. Historically, if you look at the Egyptians precede the Greeks by about 3,000, 2,500 to 2,500 years. Mm-hmm. And so the Greeks actually get their knowledge from Kemet. Okay, that's what the Egyptians call themselves. They get their knowledge from Kemet, then they bring it to the West, and they establish the foundation for Greco-Roman or Western culture. Mm. But its origin is actually East African. Mm-hmm. And so when Malcolm starts to realize this, he's like, well, wait a minute. Mm-hmm. Then why are we in the position that we're in, not only here, but throughout the entire African diaspora in the Caribbean and Central America and South America and Africa? We are in that same status, with the exception of Ethiopia, because they were able to successfully fight, the Italians under Emperor Haile Selassie. That's why he's revered. But so Malcolm comes to this realization that, hey, something is wrong here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to correct that wrong, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and I'm going to fish for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and I'm going to bring these souls back. He used to call them the lost found Negroes in the American wilderness. And I'm going to go get those lost founds, and I'm going to teach them the truth. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a foundation, for building economic, social, and cultural independence in the United States. So that was Malcolm's thing. And his the problem he had was with religious doctrine, and that's where the friction ends up. Mm-hmm. But if you look at Malcolm, when Malcolm goes on his own journey, he really starts to accelerate. So when he leaves the Nation of Islam, he really starts to accelerate. He starts to understand what was going on in Bandung, Indonesia. Have you ever heard of the Bandung Conference? Mm-hmm. Bandung Conference was a conference of newly independent nations in 1954 who had gained their freedom from European colonialism. And so they had a collective meeting in Bandung, Indonesia, where they started to set the stage for the future. Now that we're independent, what are we going to do? And so what you start to see is the rise of these independent nationalist leaders, they used to call it the third world, so they could make plans for the future. And Malcolm starts to think, what if African people do the same thing? This is after he leaves the Nation of Islam. And then he travels to Africa, and he sees the Africans led by Kwame Nkrumah, and Jomo Kenyatta, developing this idea of African unity, the Organization of African Unity, right? Because what Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah, figured out is that if we take all these African states and we take the wealth of Africa, which is the basis of Western capitalism, is that wealth from Africa, right? If we take that wealth from Africa and we use that wealth, we could essentially compete with anybody. We can compete with anybody. And that's when they become dangerous. And that's when you start to see those assassinations against those African leaders. But Malcolm brings the same idea back to the United States. And he said, why don't we create this Organization of African American Unity?
Because it's an economy problem. It's in racism and classism and
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's when he becomes dangerous. He's not dangerous as a member of the Nation of Islam. He's dangerous when he says, let me go out and reach out to Martin Luther King. Let me reach out to the Congress of Racial Equality. Let me reach out to the NAACP, and let's put all of our minds together and let's come up with a collective response to racism. That's when Malcolm X becomes dangerous, when he starts to travel to Harvard and the white students start to listen to him. Mm-hmm. And he travels to Cal and they listen to him. And he travels to Oxford, right over there in England. And the white students start to listen to him, right? And he goes to Mecca. And he realizes once he goes to Mecca that people of similar economic means are in the same position nationwide. And you can have white brothers like you did in Mecca on the Hajj, and Asian brothers. And you can have brothers from Africa, and you can have them from Indonesia. And they all treat each other with the same level of respect. And so the issue is economic, much more so than it is racial. All right. That's when Malcolm X becomes dangerous. And that's essentially when his death warrant is signed, when he comes to that realization.
I mean, we see it now in the streets that people standing up right. and using their voice. What happens is the people in power say, "Oh no, you don't," and they start flashbanging right. you or pepper spraying you or beating right. you with their sticks. And I think right. about the Black Wall Street and how that was a very strong, profitable, insular in its own way community. And again, as you said, it becomes a threat.
Right. It's a threat. Yeah, think about this. After the Civil War, Black people in the United States owned about 20 million acres of property. 20 million acres of property. Okay, my granddad in Ocala owned about 25, I think it was owned about 25 to 50 acres. And so you had this possibility, after Reconstruction, that things for those freed people of African descent were going to be different until Reconstruction ends, the Klan rises, Jim Crow laws are developed, right, to actually disfranchise those people who were actually moving in the right direction.
And to take them and displace them and move them into areas that are not, they're more dangerous, or they maybe aren't places where you can grow crops, or maybe,
right.
you take away the farms from people. You just go in and take it. And
right.
yeah.
Right. And so you had a series. Black Wall Street was one of many such attacks. And that was part of that, those red summers, because they happened all over the South. They happened all over the South to black towns. There was even a black town in California, Allensworth. Yeah. So you had black towns all over the United States.
Now, for people who are listening, and some might think, well, wait a minute, black towns, isn't that segregation? Isn't that what you don't want? What would you speak to that?
I would say this. Okay, if you look at the time when these black towns were established, okay, lynching was legal, right? Lynching was legal.
Still is.
Yes, it was legal. You had people taking postcards, all right? You had people smiling.
Yeah, I've seen.
You had people having picnics around the lynching.
Yeah.
Okay, you had people taking souvenirs of body parts and selling them.
They would go on dates to lynching. People would go on a date to go watch a man or woman be hung from a tree for the offense of talking to a white person, or or in the case of Emmett Till not doing anything but being accused of something.
Right. Yeah, and that was the 20th century. You had mass lynchings. In Arkansas, you had about 240 sharecroppers lynched at one time. Mm-hmm. And you had these atrocities. And so you see the anger in the black community. The anger in the black community is hereditary because it passes on. These stories pass on, right? They pass on from the South. When you talk, when you're sitting with your grandma or your granddad, your aunties and uncles or your grands, and they tell you these stories, it passes on. Then you see it actually out in the street, and you see it on the news, and now you see it on video on a regular basis, and then you add it with those stories from the past, and you have this explosion. I would say the difference between the red summers in the riots, long hot summers of the 60s and the rebellion taking place now is this is a multicultural rebellion, and it crosses all socioeconomic groups, and more people are now seeing what's happening.
Yeah, the revolution will be televised.
It is televised. It is televised. Gil Scott-Heron would be proud. He's one of my, he's one of my heroes. He spoke of, the no-knock law before Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor was murdered because there's no-knock law. Gil Scott-Heron, he had this poem. It went, you explained it to me, I must admit, but for the record, you were talking shit. You long rap about no-knock being legislated for the people you've always hated in this hellhole that we call home. No-knock, the man would say, to stop that man from beating his wife. No-knock, the man would say, to protect them. People from themselves, but who's going to protect me from you, the likes of you, the nerve of you, to talk that shit face to face with your tomato face, your deadpan, deading another brother's freedom plan, no knocking, head rocking, inner shocking, cussing, killing, lying, and being white. And it just goes on and on and on. But so he attacks that problem in the 1970s. So it's, it's nothing new that, that Breonna Taylor was killed, that particular law that's been used, to actually just shoot people up.
My frustration, too, is when people say, oh, but, there's only a few bad cops, and I think, well, here's the thing. If there's a cop that knows there are bad cops and they don't say anything, they got it on them, too. If you don't stand up for, and the unions are a problem. There's all sorts of problems in there, But if there are, fine, let's say there's 100 great cops and 10 bad ones. If the 90 good ones aren't saying shit, then to me there's 100 bad cops. There's just no other way to look at it.
Right. Yeah, but it's not the individual police officer. It's the institution that was created to police black bodies.
They were to get slaves back, right? Wasn't that the original purpose? Was to
You said what now?
Was to get slaves back with runners?
Yeah, African people who were enslaved. They were patrollers. They used to call them paddy rollers. That's where the word patrol comes from. And so they would go out and they would police black bodies. So it's not the individual white police officer. It's the institution that was created to police black people throughout the history of the English colonies first and later the United States, still today. That's why you see black bodies being policed in a much different way as you see treatment of, I would say black and brown bodies, much different way than others. And it's the same thing if you look at, with Malcolm X when he goes to Mecca, he's saying it's not white people who are evil. It's that status of white supremacy, because when he goes there and he sees Muslim people who are white, he eats at the same table, right? He sleeps in the same room as blonde-haired, blue-eyed white people. But he says they do not bear that status of being white. White is a status that is causing the problem of supremacy.
It's not even that there are black officers who are also violent against blacks, because it's, again, like you say, it's not about the police officer as so much as the system that surrounds them.
It's the institutional racism. The same thing with the educational system. It's the institution. It's the institutions that are unfair. If you look around the United States and you look at money allocated to certain resources allocated.
Yeah, for sure. Resources, again, economics. Right. And this is the tricky thing about saying defund the police, is because that was literally the worst word I feel like they could have used, because immediately people are like, oh, you're not going to have cops? Like, no, that's not what it means. It doesn't mean that. It means to take the allocation, a gross misallocation of funding, and putting it back into a community that desperately... You should not send an armed police officer into a situation that is not warranted for a crime. If there's a wellness check, or there's, this, it's so frustrating.
When I was growing up in Vallejo, we had called the Omega Boys and Girls Club. Initially, it was Omega Boys Club, and it was started by Fillmore Graham, a great community organizer, Fillmore Graham. And you had, Mike Wilson, who still coaches at Vallejo High School. You had Livingston Grant. You had Joe Thurston. You had all of these black leaders of the community who worked with a group called the Police Athletic League. And the Police Athletic League were actually policemen, black, white, whatever policemen, who worked with these community activities with the kids. And they worked with the Omega Boys Club, and they had all kind of events. They would send you, to see the Giants games, and they funded all sorts of activities. That's what defunding the police looks like.
Yeah, it's more of a community.
Teach, coach,
Yeah, because a community. If you take any people, and you are constantly looking over their shoulder, like, think about it as in terms of this. If I'm at work and I'm working on something, and my boss, let's say, or some coworker comes and stands right behind me and watches me work all day long. I mean, just feeling that right now, I'm sort of, my shoulders are hunching. I'm feeling aggressive, like, get the fuck off me, And so if you do that in a community sense with all these people, then what do you expect?
And you take people from outside the community. They used to live in the communities.
Yeah.
So you knew them.
Yeah.
And you would like to see them coming around. But then you bring in these, I tell you exactly what happens as of late. You have these, you have all of this money allocated to the military. So they have all of this surplus equipment. They give that surplus equipment to the cities. And so all of a sudden, the nature of the police force changes. And so you see these, you're looking out and you're seeing this, these armed occupiers of the community when they used to be community members.
Mm-hmm. And leaders.
And think about if they cut those budgets in half and, parks and rec, libraries, music, schools, and have the police officers work directly in the community as community members, as opposed to being an outside armed occupying force. And then they have a different feeling because they know the people that they're working with. Mm-hmm. That's defunding.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And education.
Gotta come up with another word. Yeah, you're right.
It's a terrible word because it immediately bristles. Words have power. Words have power.
Yes. Most definitely do. Yeah, most definitely do.
Does the feeling for you, considering you've been through other experiences that are similar, does it feel different this time, or does it feel the same? Or
feels a lot different. Again, because you have so many people represented. Black community in the United States represents about 13% of the population, but that's not what you saw out in this rebellion. And I would tell you, since you're a musician, music has played a key role in changing this social paradigm. And I noticed that with a lot of the teenagers, they look at each other differently. They meld together a lot better than they did in the 1960s. Like I said, my community was bordered. You stepped outside that community, then all of a sudden the tension rose tremendously. One of the things about this rebellion that, is also a part of it is you had outside white agitators that really changed the nature of a lot of what was going on, nationally. But if you look at the organic rebellion itself, the organic rebellion was completely different than what it turned into. But it makes me very hopeful, to see all of these people out there. You saw Asians, you saw Latinos, along with the Black brothers and sisters. You saw gays, you saw straights. It didn't matter, and, everyone is looking for justice. Yeah, everybody's looking for justice. Now that's the first phase. Now it's the solution time. So now is when we have to move, because it's a pressing, everyone sees how pressing it is. James Baldwin's essay, The Fire Next Time, which was about the long, hot summers, was a warning. The fire next time is going to burn much hotter. Can we afford the fire next time to burn hotter than this fire here? Mm. Because this thing is not nationwide. This thing is worldwide.
Yes, it is.
Worldwide. But you see that same supremacy acting throughout the globe. Because remember, it travels with the age of exploration. And so everybody's dealing with, people of color are dealing with that same, that same devil of that white supremacy. Right. But the younger generations are looking at things differently.
Do you think the equilibrium will be reached? Because there's that whole thing about appropriation, about, white people trying to be black, and yet it's okay to mimic you, but somehow you're not worth being equal to. That's confusing. What's that about? There's I
think that's more about money. Instead of being genuine, using the culture of Black people to profit off of, as opposed to being genuine partners, using it to profit off of, as opposed to being genuine partners. Okay, think if we didn't have those divisions at all. Think of if we taught history properly, from a child that's born today. That child, by the time they're 20 and they voted 2 years, they're going to make decisions based on their reality about who we are as people of color, who we are as people. They're not going to make their decisions based on the incorrect histories that they were taught. And so in 20 years, child born today, by the time they're 20, they've been an adult for 2 years. Everything changes. Everything changes. And right now, we're right in the middle of this social paradigm. Now is time to make changes that are going to be long lasting. The next generation will be different. The next generation won't have to worry about, the fire next time if we do things properly now.
Yeah, Albert Einstein said, they asked him how he thought World War III would be fought, and he said, I don't know, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones.
100% right. Albert Einstein, that professor who taught at Lincoln University, a traditionally black college, like a lot of the Jewish teachers did. They taught at traditionally black colleges because they could not teach outside of traditionally black colleges. And
there's a long history of Jews and blacks, in solidarity with each other, which I think a lot of people aren't aware of.
But again, that's history. Mm-hmm. Think about if they really understood, Sears and Roebuck, who were largely responsible for building the state-of-the-art black schools in the South during Jim Crow. That was built from Sears and Roebuck money.
I did not know that.
Yeah, think if they knew that the Sears and Roebuck catalog was made so black people could shop. Since Jim Crow, they couldn't go to Jim Crow stores. Think of if they knew that they partnered with W.E.B. Du Bois in finding the Niagara movement, which eventually becomes the NAACP. That's what I mean by teaching history correctly, as opposed to teaching history that's going to maintain this notion of superiority. When Jefferson came up with the idea of history in the first place here, the only reason why he thought American history was important was to create a citizenry that would have civic virtue, because in a republic, it's necessary for the citizens to love the republic. So they'll fight in wars, they'll pay taxes, they'll obey the laws, they vote, etc. So if history is taught correctly, then you have this demographic shift that's taking place, because the nation is going to become majority minority within 20 years. White people don't fear that because everybody's an American. And if everybody who is an American has civic virtue for the country, they're going to act virtuous towards the republic. They're going to love the republic. But if you have a large segment of the population that is not virtuous, the fire next time. Rome was a republic and it fell.
Yes. Jefferson did not anticipate Facebook.
No, he didn't. Right. And neither did his 250 enslaved African people. Mm-hmm. And neither did his Sally Hemings, who was his slave, I would say concubine.
Yeah, I always say concubine, yes. Yeah.
Who was actually the half-sister of his wife.
I did not know that.
Yeah, but that's history.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's history. History is different if you look at it closely.
When you teach your classes, are you given a green light because you teach at a private school and a Catholic school on top of that. Mm-hmm. Do you find that they are more strict, or are they loose about how you teach, the texts you bring in? Because I think that matters.
You know what? When I first introduced the class, about 31 years ago, things were much, much different. Okay, it was very stressful even to say the word black. You know what I mean? It was stressful to say the word black. So it was a struggle at that point. Okay, but, gradually because I've got, my library at school, I've got about 500 books on African history and culture. I've got about 500 books. And so it's very difficult to argue, with research, resourced information. And we have, a Black History Month assembly where we teach to the entire school the essential curriculum of African American history, who we are as people. And so we had a Black Family Day where we had 250 people come to our inaugural one. And we were going to have, a Latinx Family Day. We were going to have an Asian Family Day. And everyone is invited. So the school has done a real good job. Now we have a Department of Diversity and Inclusion, right? So the school has gradually grown, with the idea of what I call real history. But it took time, which is fine, because I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't going anywhere. And, what I knew to be true isn't going to change, because I started teaching, the first person that taught me history was my mom. She used to sing our lullaby. She would sing, to be young, gifted and black. Oh, what a lovely way to be. And she would sing that as, we were waking up in the morning. So we would wake up with a completely different attitude of what it meant to be Black, even in the 1960s. Then when I went to that school, Floston, they would bring in young teenage Black Panthers, and they taught Black history, right? And so my whole framework was different historically than Western civilization. Then I went to college, San Jose State, which had a Black Studies department, a full department. And I studied under the father of, the institution of Black history, Dr. Oba Tashaka at San Francisco State University. And I studied under Dr. Richard Navies at Berkeley High School, who created the first Black studies courses in high schools. Okay, so my foundation was real strong, so it was hard to argue against. And, now, things are moving more and more in that direction because of the demographic changes taking place in the United States, that I think a lot of what you see politically is a reaction to those demographic changes. But they shouldn't be feared as long as we all are really Americans. Yeah. And we all have that civic virtue or that love of self as Americans, like Garvey instilled in Black Americans. Garvey instilled in Black Americans. He used to say, up you mighty people, you can accomplish what you will. Back during the height of Jim Crow and lynching, up you mighty people, you can accomplish what you will. All right. So essentially he was saying, hey, don't be afraid of anything. You can do whatever you need to do to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, the idea that you can imprison a person's body, but not their soul, not their mind.
Right. Free your mind and your ass will follow.
That's right.
Free your mind and your ass will follow.
What is your opinion on cancel culture? Because I read a lot about that, of course, and people who've said things when they were 20 versus how now they're 40, or people that say it last week versus now. And the one thing that I think is unfortunate personally about cancel culture is that it does deny the doer of growth, because it immediately says, you're out, your life is over, the doxing and all that stuff. Instead of, it seems to me the correct answer would be, you know what, you're not right here, and this is why, and let's put you in some classes, let's give you some books, let's assign you humanity for a while, and then come back and reevaluate.
Let me give you an example. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that brought up something to me. So I told you I was in the hospital for 17 days. All right. So an orderly came in one day, a middle-aged Black man, came in one day and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" I'm like, no. And he said, you remember, you used to come and you would roll up on us on the corner because, there was, young black kids, doing stuff out on the street corner. And you would always stop every single day. And you would stop us from doing what we were doing. And you took us over there to the YMCA. And you took us out on the bay in a yacht. Right? And you told us not to get any bad paper. And things will turn out for you if you just keep grinding. And he said that you used to work with us, all of us on the corner on the same block that you lived in. And I'm just coming in to thank you. If he would have been held liable for what he had been doing back then, he would be in prison. Right? He would have been in prison. All right? He would not have worked in this hospital that he worked in for 20 years. All right? So if people redeem themselves, they should be allowed to be redeemed. That's what you get from the Malcolm X story. Okay, Malcolm X was a big-time drug dealer. He was a big-time pimp. He was a big-time hustler. He did a lot of dirt, right? But he was redeemed. And then he became a very different person. And after that, all he did was good. Yeah, so people should be allowed to redeem themselves. Yeah, because we're humans, right? Hey, human, we're humans. Yeah, we should be allowed to be redeemed.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
Humans make mistakes.
And even
if they truly repent.
Right, that's the thing. Is if you provide opportunity for people to grow and learn, I think that's a healthier. Because what happens to the person that you destroy them based on whatever their mindset is in the moment is you've now created a true enemy of the people.
Right. Right.
And that serves no one.
Yeah. What advantage have you gained?
Yeah.
Yeah. What advantage have you gained?
But that's the whole argument with the prison system, which is so messed up. That could be a whole 5-hour conversation. But that when people argue with me, oh, well, they shouldn't be educating people in prison. That's ridiculous. And my tax dollars. And I think, my God, what do you not want a society that functions with education and hope? And if I can't read, I love books. I love reading, and I can't imagine the prison of not being able to read. And there are so many people in prison that can't read. It's atrocious. Of course, you should go in and educate these people that are in prison.
Yeah,
white, black, Chinese, whatever. Have you
ever visited a prison? Been inside?
I have. Yeah, it's teaching, doing songs.
You said what now?
Performing songs.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I work with a program called the Squires. We used to take youthful offenders into San Quentin. And what the lifers would do is the lifers would take them through the prison, and try to get them to change their ways. And if you go into a prison, it's a human zoo. How are you supposed to redeem yourself, in that kind of environment? And you figure we got about 2.5 million people that we're allowing to waste.
Because it makes other people money. It's economics, once again.
That's crazy. Yeah. Yes.
The value of you in my prison is worth more than what I think the value of you outside as a functioning member of society.
Right.
I think people should be able to vote when they get out of prison. I think that should be restored. But these are considered insane ideas. I don't understand if the whole concept of you do a crime, if you are, and we can go into a whole other talk about how many people go to jail for the dumbest reasons. People of color. I go into any pot store and it's all a bunch of white people, and still there's all these people of color in jail for having a joint in their pocket. That's insanity. Right.
It's insanity. It's insanity. And it costs a lot more for the state to have non-productive people. San Quentin, I think, is something between $50,000 and $75,000 per person per year. Send them to Stanford instead. Stanford instead of prison.
Yeah.
It's the same cost, dang near.
Channel the energy. Channel the. Right. If you take away someone's hope, then a hopeless human is a dangerous human. Because what have they got to lose?
Right. Of course. And a lot of them are brilliant people.
Absolutely.
Right. And a lot of them, think of how much some of them will read in prison. And they become just like Malcolm. Mm-hmm. He reads everything he gets his hands on. Mm-hmm. He reads the dictionary from cover to cover. So he's a completely different person when he comes out. He becomes an influencer. Mm-hmm. He sways opinions worldwide still today. But he was allowed to be redeemed.
Yeah, and unfortunately, people hear Malcolm X, the name Malcolm X, and immediately they think of civil disobedience and unrest, and they have the picture of him of vilification, and it's so unfortunate because if you watch him being interviewed, listen to his speeches, there's so much beautiful value in what he's saying and writing and thinking and.
Yes, right. The text we use for African American studies, is Autobiography of Malcolm X. We always start with chapter 11 called Mecca. That's where we start. And if anyone who thinks that Malcolm X is this terrible person, read the autobiography, but start with the chapter on Mecca. Start with the chapter on Mecca. Because like we talked about, redemption, his total focus changes. The organization of Afro-American unity. Becomes the most sought after speaker at a lot of liberal arts colleges in the world. The most sought after because of his mind, like you said. And how he develops it, once he, once he kicks that dope habit he has.
Yeah.
All right. And once he really starts to figure things out.
Yeah. Brilliant mind.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But he's redeemed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite text that you like to use? Do you have one, like a definite, anyone listening that you could say, here's a great go-to?
Favorite book or favorite text?
Both. How about we'll give you both?
Jeez. Favorite text? I'm gonna have to say Malcolm X, because Malcolm X's worldview when he goes to Mecca and he talks about the Bandung Conference and he talks about what people of color can do. And he talks about the cooperation he experiences between all races in Mecca. So I would say favorite text is the autobiography because you can use it. It applies to anything because of the 7 different stages that Malcolm goes through. So I would say Malcolm is my favorite text. In terms of my one favorite book, I told you I got 500 of them.
I know, me too.
I'm going to say Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man.
Oh, such a good book.
Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. Because what I have to do is, in order to read the book, I have to go back to the historical figures and the historical places and the historical events that he talks about in that book to make it make sense to me. So I don't read it just as a story. I put it in its historical context. And so, I can, read The Invisible Man and my mind will go back to, this book that I've read. And it'll go back to this book that I've read. So it allows me to exercise, more of this, exercise more intellect than I would if I just read the book. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Tony, thank you for your time and your knowledge.
Oh, my pleasure.
It's been my pleasure. I really appreciate it. Yeah, considering I reached out to you blindly and you said yes, I'm so thankful for that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because, again, what we're trying to do around here is you haven't been to downtown Oakland, but if you look at downtown Oakland, and this is what another thing we're going to bring up in the movie. You look at in fact, I'll share with you some of the artwork in downtown Oakland all of a sudden. It reminds me of the Harlem Renaissance. The whole place was, the whole downtown was smashed, which is terrible for those local merchants. But what a lot of youth artists have done is come in and just created these beautiful artworks. So it makes things hopeful, even though it really did a lot of economic damage. And, what we're trying to do with this, with this movie that we come out with is we're essentially trying to do the same thing. We're trying to look at a whole bunch of different viewpoints of what happened during that rebellion. And we're giving a historical overview. And at the end, we're going to offer solutions. Okay, but solutions not from my generation, solutions from Ayanna's generation. She's about 25 years of age.
Is that the movie that I watched that you sent me? Is that her? The movie you sent me, is that her?
Is she starring in it?
No, the movie you sent me. That's her as a filmmaker. Yeah.
That's Ayanna. So she's going to be putting this thing together. Mm-hmm. I'm doing the history part of it. Mm-hmm. Kirk is doing the organizing of it. Mm-hmm. But so what I do, and I just talked to her this morning. I talk to her every day. But what I do is we talk about a historical framework. And what she does is using her creative mind, she bits and pieces it together. And, so every time I come up with a new interview, I got a call just out of the blue yesterday. Like I got, your text, from a young man who I used to teach who won the Medal of Valor, the highest, the highest honor that a civilian can achieve. And he received it from President Bush, but he's never told anybody about it because he's a very humble guy, but he's agreed to be part of it. But he's an Oakland kid. He's not a kid. He's a grown man now. But he was a hero on 9/11 when the planes hit. All right. And he's stuck in there, but now he's got PTSD. But what he's offering is solutions. So that's what we're going to finish up the movie with, is solutions to, everything that we talked about.
And where will that movie be made available? How can people find it?
Well, what we're going to do is there's the name of our company, Melanin Works Media. Melanin Works Media. So what we'll do is I'll send it to you, the link to it, just like we did with her movie. And, I'll send you the links to those, that artwork that I told you about, too. It's really, you're going to be impressed. It's really amazing.
I'm excited. Yeah.
Yeah. It offers hope.
And I put links on the Hey Human Podcast links page, and people go there and they can get all this information. I'll put books that we've talked about and historical information and all of that, because I think it's so important. We have to tell. Right. We have to tell the stories. That's the other issue with the oral tradition falling away in a world that's become digitized. Is we're losing all these stories.
That's why I love this podcast. Once you sent it to me, and I started going through these, and I like the name Hey Human. That's who we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we're humans, even though we haven't, we've had to do all this social distancing, which has caused a lot of stress for a lot of people. Yeah, we're human beings. Yeah, we're meant to, associate in this manner. Mm. Yeah, we're meant to associate in this manner. I always told my kids, my son is Oakland Fire, so he's been a part of the struggle out there in the streets. My daughter's an executive at Apple, but, they came from very humble roots. My daughter started slinging cell phones for minimum wage in the kiosk. Okay, now she's a top international executive at Apple. So it's possible, but what you have to do is maintain human connections and understand how people work and talk to people and communicate, across, what we consider racial lines, which are just, a series of social statuses, created for, nefarious reasons. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Tony, thank you. I wish you
Yeah,
huge success for the movie as well. That's exciting.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's been a real pleasure, and I'm going to update you on the movie because it's going to be great.
I'm very excited. Tony, thank you.
Yeah.
Have a lovely
thank you.
Have a lovely day. Bye.
Appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.
All right, peace.
Rate and review Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay safe. Be loved. Bye.